We're back with new reaction from Donald Trump's legal team on the decision in the Fulton County case. In a statement posted to the Trump campaign website, the former president's lead defense counsel argues that the court did not afford appropriate significance to the alleged prosecutorial misconduct of Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, including the financial benefits. And he promises the team will, quote, use all legal options available and continue to fight to end this case. Now, this comes as NBC News has new reporting on how the Trump campaign plans to use his court dates for political gain by attacking President Biden to muddy the water with voters and in the process make the legal issues a less significant issue. Let's bring in one of the authors of that NBC News report, senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen, along with Sam Stein, Politico's deputy managing editor for politics and an MSNBC contributor. Also with us, Jim Messina, who served as White House deputy chief of staff under President Obama, and he managed his 2012 re-election campaign. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So, Sam, give me your assessment of how this Fulton County decision affects the 2024 race. Trump has obviously spent a lot of time attacking Fani Willis. What does this mean for him politically?
Well, they obviously wanted the case dismissed. They didn't get that. They probably muddied up the waters enough that partisans are going to go to their corner here and believe what they want to believe. I think in the aggregate, though, their preference is to not have any of this going on at all. That is no longer likely to be the case. We most likely will still have a trial in New York. And look, yes, these were advantageous for Trump in a primary campaign. It rallied the base behind him. It helped him statistically with fundraising. You saw massive spikes in fundraising for his political committees after trials happened and when he would show up at the courtroom. But that's not, we haven't tested that proposition, let's put it that way, in a general election. And I think, for better or worse, I would think they would rather not have the conversation and the preponderance of media coverage be on him in a courtroom. Nor would they like to have him in a courtroom. I mean, he's going to be in a courtroom potentially for 6 weeks when this New York trial begins. That greatly prohibits the type of campaigning he can do. So I don't know if this is a net benefit for him like it was during the primary campaign.
John, tell us more about how Trump plans to use his court dates for political gain. And could this Fulton County decision play into their strategy?
Sam did a very good job of explaining sort of the thinking inside Trump world in terms of recognizing that this is not good for them and that the best they can hope for, in talking to people around him is to sort of neutralize or blunt this issue a little bit in terms of the general election. But Sam also made a good point about just how much this has benefited him with his base. He loves to be able to go to court and then raise money off of it. I think what you're going to see, though, is a little bit of a bifurcation of the strategy. So Trump will go to court. He's going to raise money. He's going to make the argument that he's the victim of persecution by prosecution, as he's been arguing for so long, hoping that that not only does the base, but also gets a little bit to some persuadable voters. But then the other thing he's going to do, we're going to see him during these court appearances going out on the campaign trail. I think there are going to be some events that are a little more focused on individual policies where he believes that Joe Biden has failed and that he has a prescription that will be good for the public. Nobody's ever attempted a juggling act like this in politics before, and certainly Donald Trump would prefer not to, not to be threatened with the possibility of prison.
And so looking at the logistics of the campaign, Jim, John also reports in this really fascinating article that the Trump campaign strategy would essentially come down to spending 4 days a week in court, especially if this hush money trial gets going. They would have 1 day a week fundraising, assuming there's a pause in the court proceedings once a week, and then they would have campaign events on the weekends where they might talk about policy. You've run a presidential campaign before. Can you imagine having to execute a strategy like this, and how do you think it would affect fundraising?
No, Anna, for a campaign manager perspective, it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, you just don't want to have this. The one thing you can't make more of in a presidential campaign is time. And he's going to be spending day after day in a court room at the exact same time where they need him out there talking to voters and raising money. And so it's just a nightmare for the campaign. The other thing is he lost in 2020 because voters just got sick of the chaos around him. They got sick of it always being about him. And so he's going to be in a courtroom over and over as these voters are trying to make up their minds. And I think it's just a real hurdle. I weirdly find myself agreeing with Sam, which makes me nervous. But I agree with Sam. It helped in a primary process. But I don't think in the general election process with these voters, they don't think about it this way. They look at this and say, is this really what we want to do with the next 4 years of our lives?
Sam, can you explain the difference between why, amplifying the legal woes would be helping Trump in a primary, but could be a real vulnerability if he goes that route in the general?
Sure. I'll sidestep Jim's slander and go to the question, which is, in the primary, obviously, there's a ton of Republican primary voters, maybe not totally engaged, but, aware of what was going on, who saw Trump and said, this is unfair. It's persecution by prosecution. This is Biden trying to meddle in our primary. And they felt real affinity for him. The other thing is this allowed for something that the other primary opponents couldn't do, which was direct online fundraising solicitations. If you look at any of the fundraising data, giving is relatively down on the grassroots level. But for Trump, it persisted in large part because he would do things like sell, T-shirts with his mugshot on it, right? So these were all beneficial for him from a narrative standpoint and from a fundraising standpoint. But the universe of people that this is persuadable for is limited, right? Independent voters, moderate Republican voters, they were not won over by this. And Democrats certainly won't be won over by this. If anything, they'll be as persuaded as Trump voters to get involved politically by Trump's trial. And so the more days that he's broadcast as being in the courtroom, the more that the narrative and the conversation is around his legal woes, it will activate both bases, but probably end up turning off those independent and moderate Republican voters who, like Jim said, just are so tired of it.
On dealing with the legal woes, Jim, NBC News talked to a Trump advisor who said, we don't even need to win the argument. We just have to neutralize it. If we do, the decision-making calculus favors us. So they're saying we don't need to necessarily get extra votes or energize more voters with the legal issues. If we could just kind of make it a neutral thing, that's going to work in our favor. Is it possible for the Trump campaign to actually neutralize his legal issues?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe voters will say, okay, they both got legal issues, but Anna, that's playing chess, or that's playing checkers when we need to be playing chess. And Sam and John have exactly right that he's just going to spend day after day talking about himself being in court when these voters are making up their minds. So we might get to a place where voters don't really understand the legal arguments. What they're going to understand after an entire fall of seeing Donald Trump in a courtroom is that he's in trouble. He's always about him, and there's something shady around him. And that you can't spin that. It just doesn't help you make your case to these small amount of voters who are undecided in this election.
John, final thought.
I would just say it's interesting. Jim is sort of presenting this as a referendum on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump being in court kind of plays into that. Typically what you would see with a sitting president, particularly one with such low approval ratings, is that the Republican side, the other side, would be trying to paint this completely as a referendum on Biden. Instead, what they've got is a little bit of a split screen where they're making an argument on policy about a referendum on Biden, who they say has failed. And at the same time, Donald Trump is going to take all of that attention away. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. Certainly an unusual and sort of mind-exploding political season that we're watching.
Our minds are exploding already, and we're just getting going. John Allen, Sam Stein, and Jim Messina. Happy Friday, guys. Thanks so much.